Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Like we've got a lot of people that are still coming in. That's great. Thank you for joining us today with Wine and Ballots. All right. Welcome to the Junior League of Denver's Wine and Ballots. My name is Ellie Venefro. I am the Development Committee Step-Up Chair on the Public Policy Council for the Junior League. This Wine and Ballots has become one of our great traditions and is especially exciting this year with so many new measures and such an exciting election ahead of us. And it seems I'm not alone in this excitement. We've got 122 people that have joined us so far. So thank you so much for joining us. We've got great speakers this evening for everybody to learn from. But you know, as we're being bombarded right now, I know everyone's seeing all the ads on TV, social media for this election year, and there's so many new measures, as I have stated, and there's several local and state that will impact all Coloradans, and it's time-consuming and overwhelming to try to educate ourselves when we receive that thick blue book. So tonight, the speakers will be providing a deep dive, nonpartisan overview to help us understand how these various ballot measures impact you, our community, and the state of Colorado. Then we will have a deeper dive panel discussion on a few key ballot measures that align to issues closest to the league's focus. Our plan is this will help all of us be prepared when it's time to vote. Before we begin the training, though, I want to give our guests a brief overview of the Junior League of Denver for those of you that are not familiar with the JLD. It's an organization of women committed to promoting volunteerism, developing the potential of women, and improving communities through the effective action and leadership of trained volunteers. Its purpose is exclusively educational and charitable. The focus of the Junior League of Denver is to disrupt the cycle of systemic poverty for women and families in Denver. The goal of our Public Policy Council is to amplify advocacy efforts to engage more members and create lasting community change. The JLD Public Policy Council works to influence and shape policy at the state legislature, focusing on policies that impact our mission, members, and community partners. We are one of the few leagues in the country with a Public Policy Council. We also provide training opportunities to empower our members to engage as advocates in their communities. We have designed this training for you to understand the purpose and effect of each measure prior to voting so you can become fully prepared when it comes time. Just a few housekeeping things before we do jump into our speakers. As a reminder, the Junior League of Denver is strictly nonpartisan. Therefore, the information you're being provided here tonight is strictly impartial, and we ask you to keep this in mind with questions that you ask as well. On that note, if you do have questions, please ask them in the chat, and I'll be receiving them from our minions that are helping us in the background, and then I'll be asking them to the presenters. We will follow up because we won't have time to get to all of the questions. We will follow up with any unanswered questions after the training and post them to the Public Policy Council webpage link that's posted here on the site. And lastly, for this training, we have partnered with Blanchard Family Wines to provide 20% off your purchase of wine through October 7th. Use the link in the code in the chat for the discount. So cheers, it is Wine and Ballots after all. All right, let's get started. Introduce the presenters. Today we will hear presentations from Ashley Whelan from Hunger Free Colorado about the Healthy School Meals for All ballot measure. Zach Martinez from Dairy Ventures, Inc. about the Make Colorado Affordable ballot measure. And Caitlin Schneider from the Colorado Fiscal Institute for an overview of the remaining statewide ballot measures. All right. Everybody ready? Let's see. We've got 149 people and still counting, so that's excellent. All right, let's get started with Ashley Whelan. She's the Director of Public Policy at Hunger Free Colorado. Her passion for policy has included work as a policy attorney at the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative, the Senior Director of Policy Advocacy at Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, and now in this role at Hunger Free Colorado. Throughout her career, she has worked with many different community-focused organizations, state legislatures, congressional members, and Colorado's governor staff to put forth policies to help more Coloradans access healthcare and food. Ashley is a Coloradan from birth, born in Greeley, and grew up in Montrose, Trinidad, and the Denver metro area. She received her undergrad and graduate degrees from Colorado State University and her law degree from the University of Denver. She loves spending time with her family, including her husband, Marcus, stepdaughter, Maggie, and the family's two adorable nuts. Before we do hand it over to Ashley, I want to make one very important note here. The Junior League of Denver voted to support the health school meals for all at a level 1, which means that the Public Policy Council and the Board of Directors for Junior League voted to support this ballot measure with full league engagement. This ballot measure aligns with our focus to alleviate poverty for women and families. So thank you, Ashley, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Ellie. This is a big group. It's exciting to have everyone here. So yeah, I'm Ashley Wieland. I work on policy with Hunger Free Colorado, and we're part of a coalition, the Healthy School Meals for All Coalition. And so I'm here to represent the whole coalition. So why don't we keep going on the slides? I'll let folks know. So for Hunger Free and other anti-hunger advocates, there's been a long time vision for healthy school meals for all kids in our schools. We know that when kids have access to food without shame or stigma, or and a lot of kids today don't qualify for the programs, then more kids eat and they learn better. So our vision is really, to have free lunch and breakfast for all students. Right now, lunch is required, breakfast is not, so it's up to each school and district if they provide breakfast. So we're hoping with this funding to cover the cost of meals, we'll see more breakfast in schools. It's really important. That there's resources and infrastructure to support our school meals programs. They have not been supported for a long time. They've been living on and operating on pretty slim budgets, like a lot of our state, as Caitlin, our expert on the budget, knows. We've been fighting for expanded school nutrition funding for frontline workers. So that's a piece of this. Just like restaurants, just like a lot of folks affected by COVID, the school nutrition departments have really struggled to have frontline workers in place. And then we want to make sure that we have more youth and parent say in what is going on in our schools in terms of what food kids are getting, nutritious food that's culturally competent, things like that. As you can see, we have this in Spanish too. Our coalition is actually multilingual, and we do everything bilingually in our coalition. Next. So why healthy school meals for all? So a big piece is the eliminating the school lunch debt and the lunch shaming. So a lot of kids, actually 40% of families who qualify for free and reduced school meals in Colorado don't participate. And there are different reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is, I don't want to be the low income kid, especially in our small school districts where everyone knows each other. It's tough to be that kid. And our sponsors for the bill that passed to send this to the ballot, they're all moms, and several of them knew what it was like to be that kid and really fought for this. It ensures that there's no more stigma in our school nutrition. Like, kids shouldn't be facing that. They need textbooks, they need food. There's a lot of immigrants in our community that don't want to fill out applications, especially out of fear of deportation of some of their family members, and don't want to share their data. And then we have kids that go hungry because of that fear. So this helps remove that issue. And then it just ensures all students can get it. I think the next slide has the income level, so I'll show that to you on the next slide. Or maybe it's the next slide after that. But so some context right now is healthy school meals for all. We actually had an opportunity to see it in place last year when we had it for 2 years, but a lot of schools were only fully really kind of fully back last year. And we had School Meals for All in place, and the federal government was covering all meals served. And so we pulled some data and we saw that 68,000 more lunches were served last year than in 2019. We saw that when it was in place, families participated, they needed it, and we know that it works. Some districts saw up to 40% more participation, but that 68,000 is about a 19 to 20% statewide participation increase in the lunch program, at least. So we have an example last year of what it can do and what it can mean, and just the kind of impacts it can make. And we need to put it back in place. This year, it was stopped. So you probably know a lot of districts are now charging again. A few tried to figure out a way to cover it themselves. I heard from Jefferson County, they already have 75,000 in lunch debt incurred for folks who can't cover it, for families who can't cover it. So we know putting it back in place is putting families in debt and putting school nutrition departments in debt, and it's a struggle. And then we also know that like we need our school nutrition departments, they dealt with a lot during COVID, and they need, consistent funding. They don't need to worry every year about funding. They, like restaurants, have been dealing with the supply chain issues, inflation, all these things. So it's time to have a permanent program in place. So as I said, that's our participation rate. 40% of folks don't participate because of their own reasons, a lot, shame and stigma. And then this is the income levels. So for a family of 4, you have to make under $51,388. So to qualify for school meals. So there's a lot of families out there that could really use the help, that kids are probably either facing hunger or taking not healthy stuff to school when they could be having a healthier school meal. Because Colorado is an expensive state. This whole country is an expensive place, and we haven't kept up. And we shouldn't have the barrier in place, period. Next slide. So this went through the legislative process. I'm so excited you all are supporting this and more involved in getting involved in the legislative process. Junior League was supportive through this whole process, so we really appreciate it. So the Colorado's budget's pretty limited. We have, I'm not going to teach the budget issues here. I'll let someone else teach that. But Colorado's budget is crappy. I'll just say that. And, we advocated for this to be covered within the general fund. But Colorado, with our limits on how much we can raise into our budget without going to a vote of the people because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, our budget's always really tight, and it's always a struggle. So in the end, the legislature decided that they were concerned about ongoing funding through the general fund and agreed to do a late bill to basically send it to the voters to have its own funding mechanism. The funding mechanism, I'll get into in a little bit. I know folks have questions on it, but this is a permanent funding mechanism just for this. So that means it won't be part of that fight. We'll make sure kids have food in school by passing Proposition FF. It passed with bipartisan support, and Proposition FF is on the ballot on November 8th. So 38 days, and I am counting. I'm appreciating watching Zach's reactions, because then it makes me know I'm funny sometimes. So what it will do, I have different slides for the different components, is first, it reimburses for every meal served for districts who participate. We did let this be optional for districts. If you try and pass a mandate on school districts in Colorado, you can say no to your bill. It would have been a huge uphill climb. And so we made this optional. Most districts participate, all districts in Colorado participate in the National School Lunch Program. And they participated last year and saw what it was like. So we anticipate all districts, or maybe a few odd ones won't participate, but most will. What happens is we're going to bring in every dollar we can for those folks that we can determine qualify for free and reduced meals. We're going to use Medicaid data to do that. And we're going to, ask for free and reduced lunch applications, but we're going to, using the Medicaid data is a new thing, and it will account for a lot more kids than we're counting with FRL applications right now, free and reduced lunch applications. And then there's a program that if you have enough low-income children in a district, the district can get federal resources to cover most of the costs. So we're going to have more districts participate in that program as well with that Medicaid data. So we're bringing in as many federal dollars as we can to cover the costs, and we estimate about 2/3 of the meal reimbursement costs are covered by the federal government. this ballot initiative is covering the rest. And every district, this is sometimes hard for districts to get their head around, because if they participate in these programs, they haven't been fully reimbursed in the past. The state will wrap around and cover full reimbursement at the federal level for every meal served. Just pretty exciting, and it helped a lot of districts last year to know they would have that funding to be able to plan and do things, and know that if they served a meal, they would at least get that federal reimbursement rate. We also know that some of the critiques of school meals is they're not always as healthy as we'd like them to be. Sometimes they're prepackaged, processed. So how can we help districts make meals healthier and also help our food systems in Colorado? And there is a grant program in place that we're expanding for districts to buy local food from local farmers and ranchers. And it's based on how many, it varies by the size of the district, but the minimum grant is $5,000 for those tiny districts. So they actually have enough buying power to work with a rancher or work with a farm to buy enough. But yeah, we want to get districts more money to be able to buy healthier food. Even the reimbursement rates are not that great. And so this will help them, cover those extra costs to make some better healthy choices, we hope. Next slide. And if people want to warn me about time, just jump on and say something, because I know I'm trying to go fast enough, but am I doing okay, Ellie?
Yeah, sorry, trying to get myself off mute. Yeah, we probably have about, 5 more minutes if we want to take some time too for questions, or a few questions come in. So
perfect. I think that's about what I have here. So that's great.
Okay, perfect.
So the next component is, I talked about this earlier. It's really the wages in our cafeterias are not competitive. I'm hearing from most districts, it's about $14 to $15 an hour. And we were hearing that it was really hard to keep staff during the pandemic because of fear, but also because of pay, and it's even harder. So, and we just want, our folks that work in our schools to be paid better and fairly, and to be able to live in our state. So we included this grant program that will provide some funding to districts to increase wages. Sometimes that can be complicated. So we also allowed for stipends. So that hiring bonus or that end of year bonus, or ways that they can help keep those staff or get those staff hired on to really help with the pay equity needs and keeping staff in the districts. Next slide. And then, figuring out how to buy healthy food, figuring out scratch cooking, buying equipment is something districts don't have resources for. So there's a technical assistance grant program to help them do that, so that they can buy some equipment for scratch cooking. And it's a nonprofit that will oversee the grant, so they'll help in doing trainings. There's already one in place right now that this program is growing with this, that would grow with this. And to do scratch cooking training, as well as work with districts to work with those farms and get to know who the farms are, and really help them, on the track to healthy school meals. The funding mechanism, the permanent funding mechanism is reducing tax deductions. So tax breaks for folks who make over $300,000 to $12,000 for individuals and $16,000 for couples. 19 states don't have itemized, so this does it for both itemized and standardized. And 10 states don't have standardized state income taxes. So this kind of puts us in the middle on that. The standard deduction in Colorado right now is $13,000. This brings it down to $12,000. So it's not changing the standard deduction for a lot of folks who are probably in that closer to $300,000 range. And that doesn't change the income tax deductions on their federal deductions. And then we've been talking with folks and asked legislative counsel about the impacts on charitable giving, and they estimated that they haven't seen any impacts from past proposals that did this, and don't estimate that there will be impacts with this one as well. So just wanted to put that out there, and we've been crunching data to make sure that's accurate, because we've been getting questions, and we still find that data shows that there hasn't been impacts in any state. It'll begin in 23-24 school year. We'll start getting enough funding to do the meal reimbursements, and then those other programs I talked about will start when we start using that Medicaid data, because the bill becomes more affordable. So those programs like the local procurement, the staff wages, and the technical assistance will start in 24-25, we think. but meal reimbursement would start right away. So we can go back to that reality. Our coalition, we have over 100 organizations in support and growing. As I mentioned, our steering committee is led by community-based organizations around the state, multilingual, people of color. When we polled, our polling shows 60% support, 30% opposed, and 10% undecided. So we're on track, but I think we really have to keep spreading the word like at things like this today and really explaining how it works to folks. I think that might be it. Here's some of the links that when they send out the slides you can get, or maybe they can copy and paste them into notes, but our website's pretty good. So I can jump to questions.
All right. Now we don't have too many questions. So if there are any that come up, in the chat, let me, feel free to add those. The first question I do have, though, it came up in the chat, is how do we know that this amount, I'm assuming that is the proposal, is the correct amount to meet the needs of today and tomorrow's Colorado kiddos? And could it be over or underfunded? Yeah,
I actually was just talking to a reporter about this. There's a random report out there that's not done very well, but actually, Colorado Fiscal Institute helped us do this. So Caitlin, shout out. They helped us figure out how to cover the costs, like where there was a mechanism to cover the costs. And then Legislative Council helped us. We estimated as close as we could with Legislative Council's estimate, and they're pretty conservative. So, we think we're pretty close to what the cost will be. If anything, there'll be a little bit extra. And that would go to the general fund. But Legislative Council is the lawyers, the folks who help and do the analysis for the legislature. And it was based on, the level that we needed to have the tax deductions reduced based on the cover the cost of the program. So any extra will go to the general fund. Any extra costs or any extra funds left at the end. And it is statutory, so it's not constitutional. This is statutory. So the legislature will have the ability to go in and change things like, the level of funding and things based on what the costs end up being over a few years. But we will advocate that they don't do that for a while until we see consistency with the cost of the program.
Great.
Any other questions?
One last question. One other question. Will this program also cover meals in the summertime?
It doesn't. It just covers meals during the school year. There's other programs that cover some of those They're separate federal programs. In the anti-hunger community, we support the programs that help fund like our local meals, like through Boys and Girls Club community centers. But we also really believe that there should be a grocery benefit card, like an EBT card for families over the summer. And so that's a national movement to do that, because some families can't get their kids to places to pick up food. And that is what's required. Generally, that was waived during the pandemic. So families have been able to pick up food and things like that during the pandemic. But that's, an old rule, a stigmatizing rule, a problematic rule for families to have to go eat there or pick up meals. We want them to do that if they want to, but we want to see a move towards similar to like a food stamps or SNAP EBT card. We would like to see that for summer meals too. So families can, buy the food that they need to have in the household over the summer. That's a whole other movement we want your help on, Junior League.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for your time today. We're thrilled to be able to support this very important initiative. So appreciate your work and the effort and those. So hope you can stick around because there might be some more questions.
Yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit. And our website and our Facebook page have some of our events up. We're going to have action days if you like to knock doors. We're knocking voters' doors. Yeah, so on the 15th, the 22nd, and the 5th of November, so on Saturdays. And then, of course, we're fundraising. We're going to have our TV commercials starting next week, I think. So you'll see very short, but very powerful TV commercials starting in about a week. So if you feel like giving, give, please.
Okay. So what's the website? You have information here. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So if anybody wants to get involved.
Yep. It's yesonff.org.
All right. Well,
FF,
thank you
and
for your time.
yeah, and there will be a sign up for yard signs and stuff soon too. We have them, so watch for that too if you want to get a yard sign.
Perfect. All right. Next, we are going to discuss Make Colorado Affordable, a ballot measure with Zach Martinez. Zach, welcome. Thank you. Just a little background about Zach. He is a legal counsel at Gary Ventures, Inc., recovering corporate attorney. Love that, Zach. Now focuses his time on policy and social impact work with a focus on housing and child welfare. He's a former staffer for 2 Colorado senators. Zach is originally from Grand Junction and now lives in Jefferson Park. He has a law degree from Georgetown and master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School. Zach, that is impressive. Thank you for joining us today, and I will hand it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm with Proposition 123, Make Colorado Affordable. I only have 5 minutes to describe, I think, a 20-something page measure. And the reason it's long is because affordable housing in Colorado is a very complex issue. And it requires a very complex solution to make sure that it addresses all 4 corners of the state and all of the really important work that needs to be done in order to, fix our problems. We'll go to the next slide. The most important thing, which I'm sure all of you guys know, is that Colorado is in a housing crisis. And the real problem is not just that Californians and Texans are moving to our state because they've realized how great it is. What the real problem is that we have just stopped developing houses at the rate that we used to. From 2000 to 2010, we developed 40% more units than we have from 2010 to 2020. Part of that is because of the economic downturn that happened at the end of that first decade, but we just haven't recovered even to this day. We're not developing units at the rate that we used to. Meanwhile, our population is going through the roof. So it's actually just more people competing over an even smaller housing supply, which drives up prices, as like basic economics tells us. So we really need to fix that. We need to create a system that allows for more development to occur. And Coloradans agree. 88% of Coloradans had said that they have serious concern about the affordability of housing in Colorado. And really was what happens if we do nothing. These numbers are pretty wild. If our current trends continue, the median house price will be $1.7 million by 2032. And you have to make almost $400,000 a year to qualify for the median house. And you have to make over $100,000 a year to afford the median rent in Colorado. People, whenever we talk about these numbers, people's minds are blown normally at how high those income numbers are. But they actually exist in the world today. California and Washington State and the Portland area require these levels of income to qualify to purchase and rent homes. And so if we don't do something in Colorado immediately, we could end up having the same housing problems that they have in California and Washington. Thank you. So what's the solution? That's the big question. This measure would set aside 0.1% of existing taxable income into a fund directed straight towards affordable housing. That would create $300 million a year that we could spend on affordable housing on a wide range of solutions that range from 0% AMI all the way up to 120% AMI. AMI being area median income, which is a number that's commonly used for defining what's affordable in affordable housing. The most important thing here is that it will not raise taxes. The courts and the title board have said that this measure is not a tax increase because it is taking existing revenues that would normally go towards TABOR refunds or whatever the legislature decides to do with TABOR refunds in years they don't decide to give you a check. It would use those funds and set them aside for affordable housing development. So Thank you. We're polling really well. The ACLU agrees. The ACLU did a poll that said we were polling at 77% support, which is pretty astronomical, but really speaks to the fact that Coloradans statewide recognize that housing affordability is something that's directly impacting them and their communities. The reality is that we have nursing shortages, firefighter shortages, police shortages all throughout the state, and just general service worker shortages. And part of the problem is people want to move to Colorado, but they're not going to if they can't find a place that's affordable on the salary that they're going to be making for the job they'd be moving here for. And people feel it. People have family who feel it. We don't have affordable housing, and we just don't have supply of housing. Yeah. Next slide, please. The one thing I wanted to mention, this slide is so tiny, but we have been able to put together a coalition of over 175 endorsers that include community leaders, affordable housing developers, like the housing authorities in Grand Junction, Denver, Lakewood, all throughout the state. And also businesses, the Teachers Association, nurses associations, the bankers, the realtors, basically like a wide range of supporters that are lean conservative, lean liberal, to come together to support this measure, because it's a really common sense solution to a problem that's facing every single one of us statewide. So we feel really lucky for that. The last thing I wanted to mention that was really aligned with the poverty alleviation aspect of your guys' work is that we, inside of our measure, is a thing called the tenant equity program. In order to qualify for an equity investment from the state, which basically means the state would be a partial owner in your development of affordable housing, you have to promise to commit to a tenant equity program, which means if your affordable housing development makes profit, whatever the state's portion of that profit is would have to go into some form of bank account that would go directly back to every tenant who lives in that building for a year or longer. What this does is it creates an equity system that's similar to owning a home that allows somebody who's paying rent to actually save money in order to have a down payment in the future to buy their own home. It's something that's not really being done at all in the current world. And by requiring it in order to access all this free money from the state, we think it's going to create an environment where a lot of housing developments are going to create tenant equity programs. And then we're going to learn what's going to really work, what doesn't, and be able to, become the pioneers of tenant equity in the United States. But that's the overview. And I could go on for days, but I know we only have so much time, so I want to save some for questions.
Yeah, we only have a couple questions that have come in so far. Actually, it looks like maybe just one. So Zach, if there's some additional information that you want to provide, we have a few more minutes. Feel free, and I'm sure he'll spawn some more questions.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I would love to. So the measure I mentioned earlier goes from 0% of AMI to 120% of AMI. Those area median incomes, AMI, is dependent on the county you live in. But what that really means is we have money set aside for the development of infrastructure to house the unhoused. There's money set aside for the development of what's called workforce housing traditionally, which is housing for people that make anywhere from 30% to 90% of AMI. And then there's also money set aside for the development and the supporting of people who are trying to basically get homes for purchase, all the way up to 120% AMI. And 120% AMI in like the Denver area would be over $100,000 a year. So there really is solutions for people who basically across the income spectrums, both for building housing for the unhoused, building rentals for people, and actually helping people purchase homes, which we think is what makes it so great. It creates a wide-ranging toolbox for developers, for local government, for the state developers to figure out what tools their community needs and then build those types of homes and get people into them. The other thing the measure does is it sets requirements for local communities to basically increase the speed at which they can develop. Every community, in order to qualify for funding, has to commit to building 3% additional affordable housing stock every year, and has to agree to what we call a prioritized review process, which means that if 50% or more of units in a building are considered affordable, then that means that that development would get prioritized review in the permitting process, which means that the process can speed up. It will incentivize developers to build affordable units because they won't sit in permitting limbo, which a lot of developers have identified as a major cost for them. So it's basically a comprehensive system that allows for financing, cutting of red tape, and also just development for people across the income spectrums. Which is why we've been able to get support all across the state from organizations that don't usually work together, because everyone identifies their needs and a solution to what their needs are within our measure.
Great. You actually answered one of the questions that had come through during that conversation, so that's perfect. Another one that came through is, do any other states participate in tenant equity programs like those?
There's no statewide program currently. It's very innovative, which is what we're really excited about. There are a few programs that have been doing it as pilots, but it's not anything on the scale of which this would generate, which we're really excited about, because the idea makes total sense, but developers and the state don't tend to be willing to give up profits to people that aren't them. So by requiring it in this measure and it being a citizens initiative, we can put those requirements onto communities, and the amount of money that they'll be able to get is still a massive amount of money to help them with development. So they'll still be heavily incentivized to take on state money and state support, even if it means giving some of the profits back to tenants.
Great. If we don't have a surplus there from Tabor, where will the funding come to support those?
That's a really good question. It's written directly into the measure that if we don't have a Tabor surplus, then the funding is allowed to be cut. And the reasoning for that, which Ashley mentioned, is the general fund is sacred in Colorado. It's very competitive to get access to that money. If the legislature is nervous about, feeding kids in the general fund, then they're going to be nervous about pretty much anything. But at the same time, so basically it could be cut if the legislature decided that they wanted to cut that. They'd be making really hard decisions on a lot of things, and they could make the choice to cut this. All of our data shows that we will not be in a non-surplus year for the foreseeable future, even if we had major downturns. This measure takes $300 million out of the surplus. This year we had a $3.6 billion surplus, and we have over $2 billion in reserves. So it's less than 10% of what the surplus is, which we don't anticipate anything happening that would put us under $300 million a year.
Right. So in essence, the theory is, we make more housing more affordable with supply and demand, and overall housing price will decrease. What are we seeing? That's a question, but also what are we seeing too from the pilots that you're seeing that other states have implemented? Are they seeing that hypothesis come true, or do we have that data yet?
That's right. So developing of housing is going to decrease prices because supply and demand. The problem is that if you only what the market solves for is the development of properties at the highest level of incomes. because that's what the developers can make the most money on. And it's the least difficult to develop, because developing a 100-unit building requires more permits, requires more infrastructure, versus developing a single family home, which is much higher per unit and has less, permitting and infrastructure requirements. So when we are using state funding, we really need to make sure that we're funding the units that the market doesn't currently correct for. If that makes sense, which is why there are requirements on making sure that we're developing units for people who make 0 to 120% of AMI. And one quick note that I didn't mention for those policy wonks out there, the way we define affordable is that somebody at that income level doesn't have to spend more than 30% of their income on rent. Yeah.
All right. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. One is, what is the incentive for developers if the profits go back to tenants?
Yeah, that's a great question. To clarify, not all of the profits would go back to tenants. The profits that would be directly connected to the state's investment in the property would go back to tenants. So say, it's a little complicated, the financing systems, but the state could become an equity investor in the property of, say, like 15%, which means they would pay for 15% of the development. And then if the property made $1 million, just for easy math, that would mean $150,000, because 15% of $1 million would have to go back to tenants. So it would only be the state's profits that would go back. One really cool thing about that is then it decreases the incentives of developers to just try to drive for profit, because first off, they have to keep it affordable, because that would be in the contract that they have with the state as their business partner. And then also, if they increase their profits, that's actually just money that's going to have to go back to the renters. So the renters will get some of it back. But ideally, what they do is they just keep their rental prices low, and maybe the tenant equity won't be huge, but that's because they'll be getting their money back to themselves every single month when they're paying a lower rent than they would have otherwise.
Great. One last question for this, and if we have time, at the end as well, when Caitlin is complete discussing her measures, and we'll answer any additional questions if we have time. But this last one, how long can we expect it to take to see significant changes with this plan? I'm sure that you guys have done some financial projections, and I mean, at this time, it seems like such a big uplift to really see some kind of an impact. So what is the projection at this time?
Yeah, so units take time to develop, which is why a unit counts towards, when I mentioned that you have to build 3% additional affordable housing units every year. Those units count as built when they get fully permitted. The reasoning for that is because communities will want to continue to qualify for the funding. And the thing that they most control is the actual permitting process. But what this measure will do is $300 million will, while being leveraged alongside private money and local money, will build 10,000 additional units every single year. That'll take probably a year and a half to like fully hit its stride. But it'll be 10,000 units a year. Our current shortages are somewhere between 150 and 250,000 units. So we'll take about 20 years to fill our gap. And that's assuming our population projections remain the same and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's a significant jump for sure, which is the most important thing. We have to do something right now because the longer it takes, the more of a shortage we have and the more money it requires to make the change. So we have to get started immediately in order to keep Colorado affordable.
All right, I think we are right at time. So thank you, Zach, so much. It's great information. And there is so much. I actually got on another call, I believe it was last week, with your team regarding this. So it's great information. So if somebody does have questions or wants to find out more, where can they go?
Yeah, we have a website. I can't promise it's as good as Ashley's, but yeson123co.com. So I'll just type it into the chat because that's the easiest thing to do. And then you can also just email me too. I mean, I get this is what I do all day. So happy to answer as many questions as people have. So I'll type my email in the chat too.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Zach, for your time.
Absolutely.
And we are going to move on to Miss Caitlin. All right. Caitlin Schneider is the Outreach Director for the Colorado Fiscal Institute. Through her role, she works to engage partners and Coloradans around both federal and the state's complex fiscal policy changes. She leads advocacy campaigns around policies that bring equity and prosperity to all Coloradans. Caitlin also leads CFI's civic engagement and voter education programs, such as Count Me In, alongside many partners. Caitlin has a lot of great information she's going to share with us tonight, so I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Schneider. As Ellie said, I'm the Outreach Director at the Colorado Fiscal Institute. We are a nonprofit, a statewide nonprofit that really focuses on budget, tax, and economic policies, and looking at how we use those policies to create equity and widespread prosperity throughout Colorado. But tonight, I am not coming to you as the Colorado Fiscal Institute. So as Ashley might have mentioned, that like if you want the budget talk, I'm happy to do that. But I'm coming to you with our civic engagement program, Count Me In. So this program, CFI has been a part of since 2016, and it's really an educational effort that really partners with groups across the state to have community conversations about the power we have to influence the public investments that shape our communities. We started to really educate and energize Coloradans about our state elections, because we know that elections are a really important way that we make our collective choices. Through the ballot measures, we make really important policy decisions. So we really wanted to make sure that we were connecting with voters and communities across the state to talk about and dissect and all of these ballot measures, because they show up in really confusing ways, right? The way that language has to be shown on ballot measures is, lawyer talk, right? It's all in legalese. And sometimes it's in all capital letters. Sometimes it feels like it's yelling at you. So Count Me In is really a program that helps dissect those ballot measures, break it down in simpler, easier ways to understand, and really help provide conversations around with communities and whoever wants to hear around these ballot measures and how our decisions actually affect the way that we shape our communities. So one important piece about Count Me In is that we don't advocate one way or another on the ballot measures through Count Me In, but instead we just share information and help guide people to trusted resources where they can find more information or get their questions answered. So that's Count Me In. We have a really, well, I'll say a website. I don't think it's as great as Ashley's or Zach's, but it is a website. And we have this really important tools for voters, such as links to the Blue Book that the state provides, that Legal Services provides, that have a breakdown of all the ballot measures. We also provide our own ballot guide, where we hope to provide easy to understand, short information about each ballot measure. So I will be sure to put that in the chat later for y'all. All right, so another thing about Count Me In is that we're a collaborative effort. So on our steering committee, we have 8 different organizations and some rockstar volunteers who have been with Colorado or the Count Me In effort for a while. And we believe that you play a key role in shaping Colorado's policies and public investments. We know that the best decision makers are informed and educated. And we know that our informed decisions really create the thriving communities that we all want to live in. So before we go into, the 9 ballot measures that are left, I just wanted to take a step back, a little civics 101, and making sure that we understand how we put things on the ballot. I know Ashley referenced their referred measure that came from the legislature. So our legislature has the ability to put things, make policy, and put questions on the ballot through referred measures. They show up as those letter measures. And so, our ballots also seem to be like alphabet soup sometimes. So those letters, we know if you see like Amendment E, which we'll talk about tonight, that was referred to the ballot by the legislature, and also Proposition FF. We also have another way. Colorado is a citizens initiative state where that means that the people, the voters of Colorado, are able to put questions and put forth to other voters, all of the voters of Colorado. And so those show up as numbered measures. And so, you know, if you have a great idea that you want to bring forward, whether it's making a new law or amending the Constitution, you have the ability to do that. You just have to go through the process of collecting signatures, such as Proposition 123, that was a citizens initiated measure. So they went through the process and collected the required amount of signatures. Currently, it's 123,632 signatures that need to be collected in order to qualify for the ballot. So those are the two different processes. And then there's two types of measures, right? We have propositions, which those change the state statute or laws. They either create new laws or change the laws. And then we also have amendments, and amendments actually change the Constitution, whether they add language or take language out of the Constitution. And amendments, the only way that we can change the Constitution is through the voters, right? So we have to vote on any time we want to change the Constitution through amendments. All right, so let's get to the ballot. This November ballot, we have 11 different ballot measures. I am going to go through most of them, and I will make sure to stop after each one just in case there's some questions. And I know that we'll have some time at the end as well. So the first measure that you'll see is Amendment D. Amendment D is, it will amend our Constitution. One of the provisions in our Colorado law is that anything that adds language to our Constitution, in order to pass, it requires 55% of the vote, so a supermajority. So Amendment D is one of those measures that's going to add language to our Constitution, so it will need 55% of the vote to pass. So what Amendment D is asking voters is it's asking if we want to require the governor to designate judges serving in the 18th Judicial District to carry out their term in the 23rd Judicial District. So a little background, in 2020, the state legislature, for the longest time, we've had 22 judicial districts. In 2020, the state legislature created a new law to create a new 23rd Judicial District starting in 2025. And really that judicial district is split, that new judicial district is coming from the 18th Judicial District, which currently is Arapahoe County, Douglas County, Elbert County, and Lincoln County. So that is the 18th district. What the 23rd district, so what the 2020 law did is it separated Arapahoe County to be the 18th Judicial District, and then the new 23rd Judicial District is Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln. So what this amendment is really doing is just making sure that there is a process, a clearer process in place to assign the judges to the new 23rd Judicial District, which will start in 2025. And so this is asking the governor to assign those judges. All right. Got through it. Kind of, you know, I think this one, my opinion, I told you that we're objective, but in my opinion, this one is probably the boring ballot measure, right? All right, so Amendment E. Amendment E is asking voters if we want to extend the homestead exemption to Gold Star spouses. So our current homestead exemption, the homestead exemption is tax reduction in property taxes for qualifying people. Right now, the state of Colorado gives the homestead exemption to seniors over the age of 65 who have lived in their houses for over 10 years, and to veterans with service-related disabilities. What Amendment E is asking voters if we want to extend who qualifies for the homestead exemption to Gold Star spouses. So those are spouses of surviving members of the U.S. Armed Forces killed in the line of duty, or those who died of service-related conditions. So these spouses would receive a 50% reduction in property taxes on the first $200,000 of their home, starting in year 2023. All right, so Amendment E asking if we want to add Gold Star spouses to be able to qualify for the homestead exemption. It is approximated that this would affect about 490 surviving spouses in Colorado who could receive the exemption. All right, Amendment F. Amendment F has to do with charitable gaming operations. So Amendment F is asking voters if we want to reduce the years a nonprofit organization must be in operation before acquiring a charitable gaming license from what it is currently 3 years or 5 years to 3 years. Charitable gaming license, a nonprofit organization can apply through the Secretary of State so that they can operate bingo, raffle, pull tab games for fundraising events. And so this is asking voters if we want to lower that year requirement of an organization to be in operation from 5 years to 3 years. Under the measure, it also says that managers and operators of the gaming activities can earn up to minimum wage until 2024. And then after that, that provision would be removed. This might sound really similar because voters actually voted on a very similar measure in 2020. It was Amendment C. It received 53% of the vote, but because it is an amendment that adds language to the Constitution, it needed 55% of the vote to pass, and it didn't get that. So it's back on the ballot. It was referred by the legislature again, and again, it will need 55% of the vote to pass. All right, questions? Ellie, I'm not watching the chat, so just pop in if there's questions. Okay, Proposition FF, Ashley did a great job. You know, she's running the campaign. I won't go into that again. You don't need to hear that explanation again. Proposition GG. So this is again referred from the legislature. This is asking voters if we want to add a tax information table to petitions and ballots. So it will require that all initiatives that increase or decrease individual income tax rates to include a tax change summary table. This summary table will show the estimated change in the amount of taxes owed for all taxpayers and will need to be printed on both petitions and ballots. The table must include 3 different categories. They're not going to take my design, I'm sure, but they will design a different design. But they must include the current average income tax owed. So what right now under the current income tax rate is the average taxes owed, the proposed average income tax owed. So under the new rate, what would that look like? And then the proposed average change in income tax. So what is that tax savings or additional tax being owed? And it will have to show up in 8 different categories, right? So taking all taxpayers and splitting them up into 8 different categories. So this will show up both on those petitions for those signature gathering efforts and on the ballot specifically. A little background, this measure is actually supposed to be paired with a bill that was passed last year in the legislature, HB 1321, which created new language requirements for all tax-related ballot measures. And so it said for that bill, what it said for measures that increase taxes, we need to add the phrase, in order to increase or improve the levels of public services, along with any specific services that the new revenue would fund after the required table language. So in Colorado, in our Constitution, we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which helps dictate how ballots show up on, or how ballot language shows up on the ballot. And so any tax increase, it has to show up in all capital letters starting with the words, shall taxes be raised by the total fiscal year amount. So really the proponents behind this, we're hoping that this could provide more transparency for voters and understanding how a tax increase or decrease will actually affect them instead of that larger number that they see on the ballot.
Hey, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Before we jump to the next one, we do have a question about Amendment D.
Yeah, of course we can.
We go back. All right. Is there a way to determine how the general public would be affected by Amendment D, if at all?
That's a good question. There is some information in the Blue Book. Do you all have your Blue Book? It's like now like the Bible that I use in October. I don't know what the impact would be on the general public, because really this is just about assigning judges to the 23rd Judicial District. And Either way, there is going to be a new 23rd judicial district, whether Amendment D passes or not. So either way, there will be more representation for the public. And so this measure really is just that nitty-gritty detail of making sure that the judges are assigned. I hope that is helpful.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right.
That's it for
Any
now.
other questions before I keep going? All right, I'm gonna keep cruising then. All right, so Proposition GG, adding this tax table to petitions and ballots for any income tax increase or decrease, which leads us into Proposition 121. 121 is asking voters if we want to reduce our state income tax from the current rate, that is 4.55 to 4.4% for both individual and corporate income tax rates. And this would start in year 2022, so the year that we're currently in. If passed, it's expected to reduce the state budget by $412 million in the fiscal year. This table on the left is not the table that GG would propose, but it has the average tax savings for those 4 different income levels. So as you see, so someone making $30,000 would save about $23 per year with this across the board tax cut. And someone making $1 million would save about, $606 or $6,600 a year. I added in a slide because we're the Colorado Fiscal Institute and we do a lot of budget analysis of how we raise and spend revenue. A different way to look at that chart that I just showed you is that's if we take all taxpayers or taxpayers who make under $75,000 represent about 67.3% of total taxpayers, and taxpayers who make above $500,000 make up about 1.2% of total taxpayers. The amount of tax savings from this income tax cut, 23.2% of that tax savings will go to this 1.2% of taxpayers, and 18.5% will go to about 67% of taxpayers. So just a different way of looking at that chart. I won't tell you if it's good or bad, or my opinion. All right, questions? All right, now let's get to magic mushrooms. Proposition 122, access to natural psychedelic substances. Proposition 122 is asking voters if we want to decriminalize the use, possession, and growth of substances referred to as natural medicines, which include psilocybin and psilocin, which also is known as magic mushrooms or psychedelic mushrooms, as well as a variety of other natural psychedelics. It excludes peyote, which is an important note, especially in creating this bill. So it will decriminalize. Decriminalizing really means that this once banned drug is still prohibited by law, but the legal system will no longer prosecute or criminalize a person for using or carrying the substance. So it's not saying it's legal, it's just saying that it's decriminalized. Another provision, what 122 will do is it will create a state regulated program for supervised access to psilocybin for people 21 and over. This measure, a similar measure was passed in Oregon in 2020. It made Oregon the first state to legalize psilocybin and create a state regulated program. So we're not the first, unlike marijuana, but it will, if passed, we would be the second. Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, so our questions are a little behind. So Proposition 121. We do have a question that came up. Who would be losing out on the money if we vote to lower it? Like welfare, transportation, where's it going to be coming out of?
So it will come out of the general fund. $412 million will come out of the general fund. It will be up to our state legislature, specifically the Joint Budget Committee is a small group of legislators who come together and put together a proposed budget. And then that is decided on the legislature as a whole. So our elected officials will have to make those decisions of where that money is going to come out of. Like Zach was mentioning, we are over our expenditure, our Tabor revenue limit. The state has a revenue limit that anything above that revenue limit has to be refunded to voters unless otherwise voted on. So next year, because we again are in another Tabor surplus year, it's looking like it's going to be about $3.6 billion again. So it will reduce that amount of money that would otherwise be refunded to taxpayers. Good question. But in years that were not in a Tabor surplus.
Okay, who proposed those?
John Caldera was a proponent behind this.
Okay.
And there is a yes campaign that Americans for Prosperity, well, actually, I think that they're going under a different name. And the group that Michael Fields runs is a proponent of this, is a yes proponent of this. There are on the Count Me In website and also the Secretary of State's website, we do have the registered issue committees if you're interested in looking at some of the campaigns for and against these measures. So hoping that can be helpful.
Yeah. There is a question that came through for Proposition 122. How does it differ from marijuana related to local governments? Can a local community say no if the state says yes?
It is, it differs from marijuana because we are not legalizing it, so we are not selling it. We're not authorized to sell psychedelics, but instead we are decriminalizing it. Local governments, so part of 122, it says that local governments can't opt out if there is, if there is a state regulated program that pops up in your community. So
I'm not sure if I'm clear, and there's been a couple of questions that have come through as well. I mean, it may be obvious to some of us the pros and cons of this, but can you give us from the blue book standpoint what the pros and cons are at a high level for those?
For 122?
For the remaining?
Yeah.
And for the other propositions as well?
Yep. So Proposition 122, some of the proponents are saying that this is a different alternative than to treat mental illness and to treat any kind of, ailments that they might have through natural medicine. So that is definitely, there's a big campaign that is pro for 122. And then the argument against 122 is that there's currently no approved FDA approved therapies that use psychedelic mushrooms. And so just the unknown of what could come from that.
Okay. Are there any learnings or analysis of how this decriminalization has impacted Oregon?
I'm sure that there is some. I don't have that information on hand, but I'm happy after this presentation to take a look at the campaign's website, and I'm sure it's the same. I'm pretty sure that it's one of the same campaigns that happened in Oregon. So I'm sure that they would have that information easily accessible. So if I find it, I'm happy to share it with you, and you can share it with everyone.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Other questions? Keep going.
Keep going.
All right. So I'm skipping 123 because Zach knows way more than I do. But so the next three measures all have to do with our alcohol laws in Colorado. So Proposition 124 is asking voters if we want to incrementally increase the number of retail liquor store licenses an individual can have with no limit starting in 2037. So upon passage, this would allow liquor store licenses to increase to 8 liquor store licenses, and then incrementally to 13 in 2027 to 20 in 2032, and an unlimited amount in 2037. Currently, liquor stores are only allowed to have 3 different licenses in Colorado. That came from a 2016 law that we voted on. And then that would go up to 4 liquor stores, I believe, starting in 2027, but I have to double check on that number. I know it's in our ballot guide. So really until 2026, it's on the slide. Sorry. So the proponents behind this really came from Total Wine stores. And they are a chain liquor store throughout nationwide at the moment, but not in Colorado. Well, they have a store in Colorado, but because of our license laws that you can only have 3, they're not everywhere. So proponents are saying that this, will allow more types of liquor stores and like more of those big box liquor stores being able to sell liquor at lower costs. Opponents are definitely some of the independent liquor stores. Colorado doesn't have a huge liquor store chain. So there is a no group that has formed, and it's mostly that mostly include independent liquor stores. All right, questions about 124, increasing the allowable amount of liquor store licenses. All right, 125, this will allow, it permits the sale of wine coolers, sake, cider, and mead in Colorado grocery stores and convenience stores that are already licensed to sell beer starting in 2023. So this measure is really going to upgrade that beer license that we voted in 2016 to allow the sale of wine in grocery and convenience stores. Again,
and what are you hearing, Caitlin, on the pros and cons of the?
Pros is making it more convenient to buy wine. Cons, again, coming from those smaller liquor stores and specialty wine shops of, losing business for allowing wine in more places. All right. 126, this is our last proposition and our last alcohol measure. So this would allow third-party delivery of alcohol. So like DoorDash or Instacart or Uber Eats will, if passed, 123 would allow those third-party deliveries to deliver alcohol to consumers beginning in March of 2023. Currently, delivery is limited to retail entities that sell alcohol and provide their own delivery. So really stores who have people on their payroll that can deliver wine. For those of you who are in the Denver area, like a store like Argonaut, they do have a delivery service, but because they are allowed to, because they pay those people, it's not a third party. This will also affect takeout. So for bars and restaurants, and allow delivery of beer and alcohol when you order food. There was a provision during COVID that the governor allowed, was allowing takeout of beverages from restaurants and bars. So this would extend that provision and make it permanent instead of ending in 2025. Again, pros and cons. The pros is making it more accessible and easier, and for the convenience of the consumer. The cons are looking at, the safeguards available for that third-party delivery. What does that mean for Colorado consumers, and what would be in place? Also looking at, DoorDash, Uber Eats, the fees that are associated with those smaller stores.
All right. We've got a couple of questions that have come through.
Cool.
On this one specifically, 126, how is Drizzly different than a third party?
That's a really great question. Actually, I just was looking into that today. I believe Jersey has its own warehouse where their own store. So they are their own entity. They don't go to a different store to purchase the alcohol for you. You purchase the alcohol directly through Drizzly.
Okay. And then how would 126 work if 125 isn't passed? I guess it goes with,
One.
this is specifically just for, they're completely separate, right? Or are they not?
Correct. They are completely separate.
No.
So 125 says you can allow the sale of wine in grocery stores and convenience stores. 126 is saying that I can go on my Grubhub app and say, hey, I want to buy wine from Argonaut and have it delivered to me through Grubhub. If that makes sense.
Do you know too, and this is a good question that I've wondered as well, would there be regulations on the fees that third-party companies could charge businesses for this Prop 126?
I think that there's some regulations on the fees that Grubhub, those third-party services have, but they're already in place. They're already established. So
Yep.
this provision does not touch any of those regulations. So that would be a whole nother effort that would need to be put in place if that's something that we want to look at.
Okay. While we have some questions still coming through, would you mind going back to Proposition E and just going through the pros and cons for that? And then I'll field some more questions.
Yes. I'll go back in slides too. Proposition E, so again, the homestead exemption to Gold Star spouses. So this would be including Gold Star spouses into the homestead exemption. The pros would be allowing those surviving spouses who might have otherwise been able to get the homestead exemption because they were married to a veteran with service-related disabilities who already qualified for the homestead. So it would allow those spouses who maybe lost their spouse to be included. Cons would be that, the homestead exemption does, in years that we are not over the Tabor surplus, it does come out of the state budget. So property taxes are paid to the county level and counties, the local level, and the local level is reimbursed by the state through the state budget. So each year there is an allocation that is set aside. So expanding it would just increase that amount that we reimburse. It is right now, it would be about $288,000 in extra cost for the state.
All right. Thank you for that. I have a question on Prop 122.
Yeah.
Does this include, if I can say this correctly, ayahuasca?
It does not include ayahuasca.
Okay.
Good question. It does include DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline.
Okay. All right. All the questions I see at this time.
All right. Cool. Well, that is my presentation. Really just, key dates to remember. October 17th is when ballots are allowed to be mailed. So you should start receiving them that week. October 24th is the first date that voter service and polling centers will start opening. October 31st is the last date to update your address or registration online to get a ballot in the mail. And then it's also the date, October 31st or November 1st, for the assurance that if you're mailing your ballot back, to get it into the mail, for assurance that it will be counted and arrive at your county clerk's office in time. And then of course, November 8th is election day. So remember that you can register to vote in person, drop off your ballot up to 7 p.m. on November 8th.
Definitely a great reminder.
Yeah.
That we don't need it with all the ads that we're seeing on a regular basis now.
Yeah, exactly.
Caitlin, I do have, I'm sure some questions will keep coming in, but while we have you, what groups support 126 and what groups do not?
That is a really great question. Right now, there is definitely, there's a support group called Wine in Grocery Stores that is supporting 125 and 126. And then a group called Fair Delivery for All Small Businesses, which I'm not sure exactly who is behind those two, but I can only imagine it's those third-party delivery services, especially the Fair Delivery for All Small Businesses. And then the groups opposing is Keeping Colorado Local. They are opposing all of the 3 alcohol measures. And I believe that it is a group of small business independent liquor stores.
Okay. Since we do have some time, would you mind going through some of the Denver ballot measures? At least some, ones of large interest would be the no eviction without representation and My Spark Denver, and any others you think that would be really helpful?
That is a really great question. I am not prepared to go through Denver ballot measures.
Okay, that's fine.
I have to do that research myself, but I believe
Sure.
that the League of Women Voters, I think they have information on the local Denver measures, if that's right.
Okay.
But I know that there is the no evictions without representation for the Denver ballot measure, the My Spark Denver. There's a sidewalks ballot measure as well. And I can't think of it. And Zach, I think that you know all about My Spark Denver. If you want to.
I do know all about My Spark Denver. It has actually been pulled from the ballot.
Oh, it has. Okay.
It will not be
So
voted on.
never mind.
There you go. It will be a pilot program instead in the city.
Okay. That's great to know. Thanks, Zach.
Yep.
One question, and it is interesting that there are so many ballot measures about alcohol this year. Do we have any sense, or have there been some studies about these propositions 124 to 126 and increasing the concern with increasing drunk driving, and any other states where they've passed? Anything that we're aware of?
That's a great question. I haven't heard of any studies on that. Again, I am happy to look into it, and these are really good questions. I know that the Blue Book and some fiscal analysis say that it won't really increase the amount of alcohol that is purchased for these 3 measures. It's just kind of moving around where they're being purchased from.
Okay. If 126 is voted no, will we revote on the takeout drinks from restaurants?
That was that came from the governor. It was a proclamation from the governor, and then it went through the legislature this year. So I think that there is an opportunity. It won't go to the voters if 126 is, or it would be 124 if it fails. That extends that law. But you can definitely talk to your elected official if that's important and you want to extend it, and we can do that both through the legislative process because it is statute, or you can get together a campaign and do a citizens initiative and collect signatures. All right, I can also stop sharing as well.
All right, Caitlin's really great information. I do appreciate your time. If people do have, additional questions, or, they're going through the blue book and they're trying to narrow down to help them make them decisions, do you have any recommendations on how they can do that?
I would
they
say,
can find some additional information?
Yeah, I would, count me in as definitely hoping to be one of your trusted resources. The Secretary of State's website has a list of all proponents and opponents. I would check out all the campaign websites too and just read through them. I know that a lot of advocacy groups do take positions on ballot measures that pertain to them and their mission. So if you are part of any groups, I would ask them to see if they have a ballot guide or a voter guide or recommendations. I know the Colorado Fiscal Institute, we will be taking positions on the fiscal measures. And so that is coming out soon. And I would ask that you guys all join our email list, and we will send those out to everyone on our email list, as well as our website. We'll have that posted. Yeah, and I guess just find your trusted resources. You guys going through this breakdown of the ballot measure. I know in my world with my friends, they all contact me. So I try and stay up to date, not just because it's part of my job, but because it's really important. And we make a lot of policy decisions on the ballot. And it seems like each year we have more and more ballot measures, and each year is an election year. So staying abreast and finding those trusted resources that you rely on, that you can go to, that you can ask questions, are really important.
I really appreciate it. I'm still going through to see if there's any additional questions. A lot of different comments. All right. Well, I do want to thank all of our presenters. This is a wealth of information. It'll really help us, to make sure that we're prepared. As a thank you to all of our presenters, we will be dropping off Junior League of Denver cookbooks. Any viewers who have not seen any of our cookbooks, please do take a look and let us know if you would like to order one. Also, thank you to everyone that's attended. This was, we've had excellent attendance, a lot of engagement. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy for me to facilitate those, so thank you for the time. Check your inbox for the link to the recording of this training and additional resources. We're also going to ask if you could fill out a survey. We want to get feedback because this is something that we are doing on a regular basis, this training. And we want to make sure that we can make sure that it's as helpful as possible. Any Junior League of Denver members that were not able to attend tonight can also watch a recording, and you can email the public policy at jld.org for credit for those of you that did see it. And thanks again for attending, and please remember to vote and have a great evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time.